Welcome to the NdB Sunday Show with me, Chris Steyn, and Jonathan Deal, the founder of Safe Citizen. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chris. Good to be with you.
I don't know about you, but I have felt the power shifting away from the cartels, especially with the testimony of last week.
Yeah, there has been so much that has emerged. Literally, I think unless one was sitting as in the gallery at the commission, very difficult to keep track of everything. And of course, the tables have been turned so dramatically. Where IDAC was on a very strong charge at the beginning, on the back of Fadiel Adams's allegations. That man himself has been exposed as being, let's call it, rather economical with the truth. Andrea Johnson, I think, is running for cover. And the very people who were vilified publicly at the beginning of all of this appear to be the ones that are walking away from it with almost with an apology from the state, if that's going to happen.
The National Prosecuting Authority has now formally dropped corruption charges against Divisional Commissioner for Crime Intelligence, Lieutenant General Dumisani Kumalo, and 6 other high-ranking police officers.
Yeah, that was on the basis of a statement by an IDAC prosecutor, an admission, perhaps rather, by an IDAC prosecutor that the prosecution itself was rushed, and literally that the prosecution, the state's case or IDAC's case, was standing on false testimony given to the commission, and obviously in the affidavits as well by Andrea Johnson. So enormous issues there. And it's frightening. It's really concerning if the machinery of the state can be literally manipulated to such an extent that people at that level can be accused of things and not perhaps. We're not saying that there was no fire at all where there was smoke, but certainly at this point in time, it seems that the state's case has collapsed.
And plots to discredit good cops are unraveling before our eyes, Jonathan. But what is incredibly disturbing is that people who were in a position to fight corruption and appear to have integrity and whistleblowers were actually on the dark side. Certain people, either being used knowingly or being useful idiots.
I think the useful idiots suggestion that you make is actually a very useful comparison, because one wonders if the people that created all of this intrigue, that planned to make all of this happen, actually believed that they could get away with it. The arrogance is breathtaking, and it's almost as if this culture of there being very little accountability in state institutions extended and bled into these very watchdogs that were supposed to protect the public from corruption, that they themselves have been exposed as being so corrupt. And it's concerning on 2 levels. One, that it's happening, and the other is that there are people that are at such a high level and such a powerful position that appear to be actually obtuse enough to think that they could literally get away with this.
Special Leave Minister Senzo Majunu comes to mind. He has been accused of trying to sway yet another witness.
Yes, we're waiting, of course. I'm still absolutely intrigued about the forklift story. He is expected to come back to the commission to be able to answer that allegation. And we will find out whether the evidence that was led under oath by IDAC staff implicating Minister Mchunu in the moving of that report, flying it across the country, and having a close interest in that 700,000 Rand forklift saga, if there's any truth behind that at all. That will be very interesting. And it was one of the central allegations against him.
Jonathan, we haven't had good luck with police ministers. We've also heard about his predecessors' involvement with secret funds.
Yeah, according to what came out of Honorable Adams's report or affidavit, there was really an allegation, nothing very specific, about some of the CI secret funds having found their way to ex-Minister Becky Cele. At this point in time, given the patent unreliability of Adams's testimony in general, I would be rather circumspect about lending that any credibility. It is a theory that may fly, but I think it needs solid proof before people start thinking about it seriously.
Talking about Adams, what did you make of his conduct at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry? The general conduct.
Oily, sneaky. I think if he was in the Wild West in America, he would make a very good snake oil salesman. That's about the most charitable thing that I can say about him. He tried to ingratiate himself with the commission, and using all sorts of colloquial terms, and generally just he was just one could see he was. I wouldn't have believed him for a second, and I don't think the commission did either.
And I don't think his former friend, former IDAC chief, Andrea Johnson, was impressed with his evidence because he turned on her, didn't he?
Yes, I think that, of course, we know, when there's very little honor amongst thieves. I'm not calling either of them a thief directly, but when people that have been colluding and who are caught out in their collusion with dishonesty, one can expect them to turn on each other. And I think Andrea Johnson, I sincerely hope that if the allegations against her all hold up, and bearing in mind that we're dealing with a commission and not a court of law, and a proper prosecution process, if that eventually holds up, then I think that she deserves everything that will be coming to her.
It will be very interesting to see whom Tenderpreneur Cat Matlala is going to turn against when he gives evidence properly, because we've only heard very restricted evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really keen to hear if there is anything more to the Mashala Malema relationship and what's going to come out of that. Mr. Malema has still not been called. One wonders if he is going to be called at all. I certainly think that the country would be very interested to hear his response to these allegations, and rather maybe a little bit more concrete than just saying, oh, well, he can't answer as to the WhatsApps and that evidence. The people that were involved with it can, as if he had nothing to do with it. So that'll be interesting. But Mr. Malema, of course, is a survivor. This is not his first rodeo in things of where there is dissension.
But when we first heard the allegations of police and political capture, everybody focused on the African National Congress. But since then, other political parties and politicians have been dragged into it.
Yes, I think I'm not quite sure if it ties into the subject matter that the commission has been concerned with, but certainly the Democratic Alliance has got a bit of a problem, I think, with their finance chap, and some very serious allegations there in terms of big money. The ANC has certainly made a bit of a fuss about it this week, and asking if there are double standards around conflict of interests and members of parliament. So the fallout is certainly wider than the ANC, and perhaps it's what everybody needs is a very good shake-up.
I think people are waiting on tenterhooks for the evidence of Lieutenant General Feroz Khan, the CI chief was shot and could not appear before the commission.
Yes, I think he's been called back for the 1st of September, if I'm correct. And although the summons has been issued, there appears to be some doubt whether he will be able to attend. He is at the moment, I think, being kept safe in an undisclosed location. And certainly, he's one of the key people that we'd like to hear from in this, no
Mm.
doubt.
But with all the evidence, IDAC has now become powerless. There's a huge vacuum.
I think that, and Glynis Breitenbach from the DA quite correctly points it out, that there's nobody leading it. And if one looks at what has happened, and certainly even Justice Madlanga's comments, IDAC, there seems to be a general impression at executive level that IDAC should actually just be disbanded, that it is, it just cannot survive politically or in terms of its job.
Okay, and there's a push now for National Commissioner Fanny Masemola to be reinstated.
Well, the police, the pop crew, has certainly insisted to President Ramaphosa that, given the fact that the charges have collapsed unconditionally, being withdrawn, that the general must be reinstated with immediate effect, and some of the other co-accused.
Now, somebody who's been very quiet, suspended Deputy um, National Commissioner Shadrach Sabia.
He has, and one is still wondering when some of that evidence is going to be led and tested. Somebody quite close to him was in the news this week, the businessman Sharnik, I think Stuart Sharnik, and who apparently intimidated or tried to intimidate a journalist from the Sowetan, who promptly laid a case of criminal intimidation. And the Mr. Sharnik was arrested immediately. So, and he has been identified as the person that then became the driver of Sabia, after Sabia had his executive protection detail cancelled. And it's really curious, the connections that run through and threads that run through all of these relationships and how they are intermingled. But yeah, Sabia, it's going to be an interesting one to see what comes of that.
Yeah, wasn't he in Parliament when Sabia appeared at the ad hoc committee?
He was. Yeah, he was.
Mm. Jonathan, what else stood out for you over the past week of evidence?
I think that this week at Madlanga, the backstory, the important backstory for South Africans, apart from all of this intrigue, and Chris, you and I have just literally skimmed the surface this afternoon, is that it stopped being about who did what to whom, but it's actually become a stress test of whether Madlanga can actually survive its own scrutiny. And that's on the basis of the NPA unconditionally withdrawing the charges. And if you layer all of that Fadiel Adams's testimony, the man who set this whole inquiry running and spent 3 days being told by the commission's own lawyers that his story doesn't add up. The political killings task team, evidence that has been led, and some of the allegations that were made by Adams in that regard. We have Kat Mashala keeping his mouth shut behind privilege in other criminal matters. Feroz Khan is certainly has now a firm date to answer for his ties to Julius Malema, even though Malema himself still hasn't been summoned. And Julius Makwanazi, please let's not make a mistake with the Makwanazi from KwaZulu-Natal, is basically walking between 4 separate courtrooms, while the state this week has suddenly stopped opposing his bail. So one wonders what's happening there. And the question I want to ask is that, do we think that the state has got the appetite to prosecute and follow this thieving, this thuggery, this corruption, um, to actually give teeth to the Madlanga Commission, or are we are going to be wondering whether the final report that is due on the 16th of November is going to land as a charge sheet or just a very long, very expensive list of names that nobody will actually convict? That's that's the question.
What has been particularly chilling is testimony about the plot to remove the good general, the good Makunazi, from his
Yes.
position.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that Mr. Paul O'Sullivan had a lot to say about that at one stage. Really, an enormous amount to say. And I think that we know that good General Makwanazi has been reconfirmed in his tenure in that position for another 5 years. And I have an unchanged view on him, chatting to somebody about it this morning, in fact. And out of all of us, he is the one that is emerging, smelling of roses and looking like a national hero.
And he has been appointed to head organized crime investigations nationally.
Yeah, yeah, and certainly the best man for the job, given the present incumbents.
Mm. As the founder of Safe Citizen, when you hear all this, how do you think us ordinary citizens ended up with a police force like this, as rotten as this?
I think that there is a dearth of integrity, a dearth of standards, a dearth of values in our government, and that our government has been permitted to do more or less what it wants. I think that it's unequivocal that the cadre deployment policy of the government led to many people being put into positions that they were technically incompetent to hold. And not only that, but in terms of their own values, honesty, and ethics, should have been disqualified from in the first place. Um, the public in this country, given the economic circumstances, given the challenges that this country and all nations in the world faced in 2020 with COVID, I think that those types of issues were a perfect storm for the corrupt persons to ply their trade and make their plans and to get away with as much as they can. The executive leadership of the country, I think, in all the political parties, ought to be, if not ashamed, then very embarrassed about their lack of ability, their lack of resolve, their lack of resilience to actually manage this stuff and hold people to account. And speaking as the leader of Safe Citizen, looking at it from an institutional point of view, where we are enormously concerned about the environment of public safety in this country. And let's be honest, the issues under the microscope at Madlanga and even Zondo go to the heart of public safety because they deal with the justice system and the police. All that I can say is that for us, it is also the perfect storm at the moment because it is vindicating our statements over the past month and years that public safety in this country is at an all-time low, and that at this point in time, the state ought to be doing everything that they can to support the public, including, for instance, lawfully armed citizens, rather than making plans to disarm them and expose them to the type of practices and thuggery that we have seen exposed to us in the last month and years.
Thank you. That was Jonathan Deal, the founder of Safe Citizen. Speaking to Biz News, I'm Chris Steyn. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chris.